Hello and welcome to RMIT's Managing Stress workshop. My name's Sophie and today I'm going to be running through with you some practical tips and some practical exercises that you can use to manage stress in your life, whether that stress be coming from your study or whether it be coming from other parts of your life. But to begin with, I just wanted to show you a little video.
I am declaring war. I can see that got your attention. What am I declaring war on? My bollocks? Stress! Stress is a disease, people, and I am the cure. I'm a doctor with the cure. No, I'm not, I'm a general, and it's still a war. A war on disease. Stress! There's too much stress around here.
They're very expensive, and besides a woman in the shop said they were way too small for me, so you know, be practical.
In the time I've been speaking, over 80 million people have died of stress. That's another one. That's another one. More. Mayhem! We've got to deal with it. Are you ready to deal with it? No. Say, I hate stress. I hate stress. No, you didn't let me finish. Say, I hate stress. And I want to limit its influence in my life. What can I do about it? Anyone? Have a bath? Have a bath? Get a bike! I cycle to work every day. 70 miles. Both here and here are as red as a fire engine. Any other ideas? Jen, what about you?
Shoes.
What?
Shoes. What? Shoes.
Okay, look. I have invited Dr. Julian Holmes to come and give a class at lunchtime. He is Europe's leading stress expert. They call them stressperts. Anyone interested in coming along, picking up a few tips on how to manage stress? There's a free buffet. Good. Good people. Oh, by the way, anyone still experiencing stress at the end of the day will be fired!
So I show you that video for a couple of different reasons. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. The first reason that I show you that video is that while that's from a fictional television show, it is actually quite a common approach to trying to manage stress. And that's an exaggerated version, but it's quite common for people to think that they can manage stress by trying to eliminate it from their lives, by declaring war on it, by basically going in with an awful lot of aggression. And it's actually not very helpful. I think it's a really problematic approach to stress. So I just wanted you to be aware that that is actually out there as a possible way of managing stress, but also to point out that it's not a particularly good one. So we're going to go through some other ways of managing stress today, which I'll come to in just a second. The other reason that I showed you that video, now some of you may be familiar with that television show, it's the IT Crowd. I showed you that video because that television show and therefore that video is set in a workplace. The point I'm trying to make there is that stress, unfortunately, is something that comes from a lot of different parts of our lives, and it's something that continues well beyond school and study. I tell you that not because I'm trying to stress you out more, but just because I'm trying to make the point that it's really helpful if you can, at this stage now in your life, start to come up with some ways that you can better manage stress, knowing that there are going to be more stressful situations in your life. It means you're better prepared for them. So on that note, what we're going to cover today is what stress is, how it can be helpful and unhelpful, how to start to identify stress in your body, in your feelings, and in your behavior. So where to look for it, basically. Ways to soothe the stress when it becomes a little bit too much, and I call that excess stress, and ways to cope with feeling overwhelmed. And as part of all of that, we're going to look at effective strategies for managing your stress over time. So let's begin with the most basic way of thinking about stress. What is stress? So what I've got up on screen here is a couple of different definitions for stress from the dictionary. That first one I'm certainly very familiar with, and I'm sure many of you would be familiar with it as well. It's a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or demanding circumstances. And we're all familiar with those kind of difficult circumstances and the kinds of feelings that we get from those, that emotional strain or tension. The second one I've included, it's a little bit more of a physics kind of definition. I've included that because I want you to start thinking about this idea of the material object. So pressure or tension exerted on a material object, that's if, say, I have a tabletop and I put downward pressure on it, that's what that's talking about. That's a stress to that material object. The reason that I want you to start thinking about material objects is that our bodies are also material objects. So they start to feel the pressure and the tension of stress, whether that stress be coming from a physical source or whether it be coming from that emotional strain that we talked about in the previous definition. So I just want you to start thinking about how your body responds to stress, and we'll come back to that a little bit later in this workshop. What I want you to do in a moment is to look at the first worksheet or the first set of resources that you have there, and what I want you to start thinking about is potential stressful situations. So if you're doing this with your class, you might like to discuss it as a whole class group, or you might like to break off into little groups and discuss that between you and then come back together as a whole group and share what those situations are. If you're doing this on your own, you might like to jot down a couple of ideas for potential stressful situations. And then you might like to look at some of the examples that I've given, that I've kind of collected from people as I've been running these workshops in the past. So what I want you to do is think of stressful situations, and that can either be that you are already experiencing or have already experienced in your life, whether that be through school or friends or workplace or anything like that, or you might like to also think about stressful situations that might occur in the future. So that might be in a workplace like in the video that we saw, or it might be things that you can think of that might be stressful about going to university, say. So just take probably 3 or 4 minutes and have a little bit of a think about potential stressful situations, and see if you can write down 2 or 3 stressful situations, either that you have already been in or that you can imagine might be stressful in the future. Okay, so hopefully either on your own or with the group that you're with, you have come up with a number of different potentially stressful situations. Now, it's really important if you're in a group to share those different situations to get a really good idea of the kinds of different things that can stress different people out. So even though you might not find a certain situation stressful, it is good to know that other people might. Now, hopefully you've come up with some situations that are across different parts of life. So they might come from study, some of them might come from situations around workplaces, some of them might come from situations in relationships, and by that I mean family relationships as well as friendships and sometimes romantic relationships, all of which of course can also be really wonderful things, but sometimes there can be a bit of tension or stress that comes from the relationships in our lives. Another really big one is potentially finances. So sometimes money can be quite stressful for a lot of different reasons. So hopefully you've come up with a pretty good list there of potentially stressful situations, either ones that you've experienced or ones that you think you may experience in the future. Now again, the reason that I'm getting you to come up with those situations is not to stress you out about how stressful life can be, but instead to start to see that stress really is just a part of everyday life, and we don't have a lot of control often over what those stressful situations are or whether or not they occur in our lives. What we do have a little bit more control over is how we respond to them and how we look after ourselves when those things are occurring. So that's what we're going to get to in this workshop shortly. Before we get there, I want you to, this is coming back to the idea of stress having an effect on the body as well as emotional or mental strain. I want you to spend a little bit of time thinking about what stress feels like. And I mean what stress feels like for you, how it is that you experience stress. So in a moment, I'll get you to pause the video again, but just to give you an idea, for me, one of the ways in which I really feel stress is that I feel like I need to be in a hurry all the time when I'm stressed. And that will be all the time regardless of whether or not I'm actually running late or whether I actually have a lot of things to do or anything like that. So I just will feel like I really need to hurry all the time. Another really big one for me, and this is why I've included the image of the fire. This may or may not be the case for you, but another really big thing for me, one of the reasons, or one of the ways rather, that I feel stress is that I get grumpy. I just get cranky about things. I feel fiery. So in a moment, I'll just get you to pause the video when you're ready and see if you can come up with, and again, you might like to discuss this in a group if you're doing this with your class, or if you're doing this on your own, you may just like to write down a couple of different things. See if you can come up with a few different ways in which you think you feel stress. So that could be in your physical body, it might be mentally, or it might be emotionally. So see how you go. See if you can come up with 2 or 3 different ways that you feel stress, or different answers to the question, what does stress feel like? Great. So hopefully you've come up with a few different ways that you feel stress. And if you're in a group, that you've been able to listen to some of the different ways that other people feel stressed. And maybe you may have listened to something that somebody else said and thought, actually, hang on, I feel that too sometimes. So probably a lot of the things that you were able to come up with are not particularly great feelings, like they don't feel pleasant. Though that's normal that stress doesn't feel all that great. The reason that I'm getting you to think about those things is that it is really useful for you to be able to identify your own stress in a number of different ways. So you don't always think, oh, I'm feeling really stressed. Sometimes you don't notice that you're stressed until it's, got to this really high level. What I'm getting you to do in thinking right now about the ways in which you feel stress is to start to identify some of the physical ways and the emotional ways that you notice stress, so that maybe you might be able to notice it a little bit earlier and start to look after it a little bit earlier. And again, shortly in the workshop, we'll get to some of the ways in which you can begin to look after that stress, and hopefully getting to it quite early. But before we get there, I wanted to return to one of the dot points that I outlined at the beginning of this workshop, which is how stress can be helpful and unhelpful. So probably having come up with a lot of the unpleasant ways in which you feel stressed, and coming up with a whole lot of the not so great situations that might make you feel stressed, you're probably thinking of stress as a pretty unhelpful thing that you don't really want to have heaps of in your life, and that's totally normal and fine. But I want to point out that stress is not actually inherently a bad thing. Stress is just a sign that you want something about your current situation to change. And the way that you think about stress is actually really helpful or really important to how it is that your body responds to stress, and that you're able to respond to a stressful situation. So just remembering that stress can sometimes be helpful, and thinking about the ways in which it can be helpful is a really useful kind of overall stress management strategy. So what I've got on the screen here is the ways in which stress can be helpful and the ways stress can kind of get a little bit too much. And I think of that as a spectrum. So you've kind of got helpful stress over here, and across here is the not very helpful at all stress. So stress is helpful at the point at which it's still giving you energy, in which it's helping you to feel motivated to get things done. And it can actually help you get things done. It can give you that energy to get the things done. If you're just feeling that little bit stressed, it sort of forces you to try and change the situation that you're in when it's at the helpful kind of stage. And it can also help you feel like you're getting things done. You feel like you're kind of doing stuff as a result of this energy from the stress. However, it does, as we all know, tip over into what I call excess stress. So when it gets too much. And as you can see on screen, when stress gets too much, it has all of almost the opposite effects to when stress is in the helpful kind of stage. So instead of giving you energy, it makes you feel tired. Instead of helping you feel motivated, you might put things off. You might procrastinate, which is probably something that's familiar to a lot of you. It's certainly familiar in my life. And instead of helping you get things done, it stops you from getting things done. You don't get many things done at all. And instead of helping you feel like you are achieving things, instead you start to feel overwhelmed and possibly upset, and any of the other feelings that you might have identified as the ways in which you feel stress. But it is really useful here to think about this as a spectrum. So stress can be helpful, but it isn't always. Before we get on to some of the ways in which you can start to manage the stress while it's at a helpful stage, and then later we'll talk about when it gets to the unhelpful stage, I just want you to think about stress from another slightly different perspective. So we're trying to get a really well-rounded view of what stress is here. See if you can have a little bit of a think about what stress looks like in another person. Now I've got a picture up there for you, and she looks sort of fairly stressed to me. Have a think about what it is that you think a stressed person looks like. Just take a couple of minutes, and you can just talk about this as a whole group if you're in a group, or you might like to just jot down a couple of different things. Now, a really good place to start with this is to take a look at this image that you have here and see if you can point out or write down or talk about why this woman looks stressed. So take a couple of minutes and see if you can come up with a short list of what a stressed person looks like. So hopefully you've managed to come up with a small list of ways in which you can notice stress in another person. In other words, a couple of answers to the question, what does stress look like in a person? Now, I've got you to think about that because talking about stress with other people is one of the most effective ways that we can begin to manage our own stress levels. But there's a little bit of research that shows as well that being able to recognize stress in another person and begin to help them with their stress is also helpful for us in learning to manage our own stress in other situations that we find stressful. So talking about stress is great for the person who is feeling the stress and needs that pressure release, but it's also good for the person who's helping them with the stress. So it's really good all round. And I wanted to start to get you to think about how you might recognize when your friends or your family or other people in your life that you care about might be feeling a little bit stressed, and to begin to have those kinds of conversations which will be helpful for them if they're feeling stressed, but also for you. Now, the other reason that I have included this particular picture when I'm wanting you to think about what stress looks like is that the woman in this picture, she looks pretty much like what I look like when I'm sitting at my desk and feeling stressed. So she's sort of frowning a little bit. She's probably concentrating quite hard on whatever's on her screen. And she's also sort of hunching a little bit. Her head's forward from her body, and she's doing what I call hunchy desk posture. Now, for anyone who is studying in any capacity, this is quite a common way that we find ourselves sitting. You may be familiar with this, and it can cause the body some stress quite apart from whatever you might be feeling about whatever assignment it is or study it is that you're doing when you're sitting like that. And what I'm going to run through in a moment is an exercise that helps in a couple of different ways. It helps to stop or pause or slow down that bodily stress that you're applying by sitting in this hunchy desk posture like this, but it also helps to sort of tap into that, remember that motivational, helpful stress that we talked about. It kind of taps into that a little bit, this exercise as well. So before we start the exercise, I just want you to do this. Just lift your shoulders up near your ears. And just sit there for just a moment. Do you feel relaxed? Because I certainly don't. This is not a very relaxing pose. So you can drop the shoulders whenever you're ready to do that. I'm getting you to do that because this is what you're doing when you're hunching, usually. You're bringing your shoulders up around your ears, maybe not as much as I am to demonstrate this, but you are starting to do that. And what's happening there is your body is feeding back to your brain this like, oh, I'm uncomfortable feeling. So the exercise that I'm about to show you is about sort of reversing that a little bit, that kind of hunchy uncomfortableness. And instead trying to encourage a posture that helps us feel a little bit more motivated and a little bit more positive and confident that we might be able to do whatever the thing is that we are feeling stressed about doing. So let's start actually by lifting the shoulders up again. And then I just want you to let them drop down. Now, if you're sitting, I want you to see if you can bring yourself just to the edge of your chair so you can't lean on the back of the chair. So you have to sit up tall. You may also like to try this standing. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to do standing. If you're going to stand, make sure that your feet are hip width apart rather than together. So you've got a little bit of a broader base for the standing. And if you're standing, bring your weight back into your heels. If you're sitting, see if you can bring your weight back into the spine, like right back into the sit bones. And then I want you to see if you can bring your head back over the spine as well. So it's not sitting forward like this. You're just bringing it back. You might want to make a little bit of a double chin, which is something that people don't usually like to do when they're in company with their classmates. The reason I'm getting you to do that is that when you sit in hunchy desk posture, like if you imagine that this is my spine, this is the very top of my spine, and just imagine that my hand sitting on top is my head. So my fingers are my chin. When you sit in hunchy desk posture, your spine is kind of leaning over like this. To look forward, your head needs to do this. So see how the chin, my fingers, is lifting. What that looks like on a real person rather than on a hand person is this. Yeah. So that's putting a whole lot of pressure on these muscles here because they're holding up my entire head. Now, your brain weighs about 3 kilos, which is quite heavy. If you're relying on these muscles here to hold you up, you're putting an awful lot of pressure on them. It really should be your spine that's holding you up. So what you're doing by making that little double chin is just coming from here, where it's the muscles at the back of the neck that are holding up your 3 kilogram brain, to here, which means that it's the spine, this much bigger structure holding up that 3 kilogram heavy, full of good thoughts brain. Okay, so just a little bit of a double chin. So sitting tall, seeing if you can think about lengthening the back of your neck by bringing your chin in just a little bit. Then from here, I want you to bring your hands out the front and keep your torso as it is, but see if you can just rotate the arms, so at the shoulders, so that the hands go out to the side. So what this looks like is this. Now your hands might be here, they might not go quite as far out as mine do. You're just rotating at the top of the shoulders. Now you may already be feeling a little bit of a stretch. That's fine. Make sure you can still breathe. That's really important. And then what I want you to do is bring your left hand across and just press down underneath your right collarbone. So that's this bone here that goes across at the top of the chest. Just press down lightly. Then from here, you move the head away from that shoulder. Make sure you can still breathe. Now you might like to play with the angle of the head. So depending on what's happening in your shoulders, you might find that tilting the head forward a little bit gets you a more effective stretch, or you might tilt the head back a little bit. So you're looking for a stretch anywhere in here. And make sure you can breathe. Now to come out of this, roll your head forward and down to the center, and then come back up. And we'll just do the other side quickly so that you don't have one really relaxed shoulder and one not very relaxed shoulder. So the hands out in front to begin with, remember? Then you're bringing the arms out to the side. This time, bring the right hand across and place it underneath your left collarbone. So remember the bone that runs across the top of the chest. And then, as you're ready, moving the head away from that shoulder. Now this side could be quite different to the first. Usually we have one shoulder that's a bit more tense than the other. Not always, but it's quite common. So you don't necessarily have to hold the head in the same angle as you did on the first side. So just play around a little bit until you find the best spot for the head so you get the most effective stretch. And remember, make sure that you're breathing. And then to come out, you'll roll the head down into the center. And then you can relax. You might like to give the shoulders a little bit of a wriggle. So if you want to repeat that exercise, you can either rewind the video a little bit, or I've provided some pictures as well, which can be really useful for you to be able to just do that exercise in your own time. It's a really useful thing to be able to do while you're sitting at your desk, particularly when you're in a kind of busy study period, just to release some of the pressure that builds up in the shoulders and in the neck when someone is feeling a little bit stressed or trying to get a lot of things done. So we've talked a little bit there about what's happening in your body when you're stressed, and I've mentioned a couple of times that being a little bit stressed can have an impact on your body. What we're doing by doing that exercise is using the body itself to start to speak back to the brain to just reduce that stress. So I thought it would be useful for you to understand what it is that's happening in your body when you're feeling stressed. So some of you may have already heard of the fight or flight response. So that's also known as the sympathetic nervous system response. And that's when your nervous system or your body or your brain recognizes that there is a stressful or a fearful situation, and it goes into fight or flight or stress mode to get you out of that situation. So again, just remembering that stress is not inherently a bad thing. Sometimes it can be a really good thing that your body and your brain prepare themselves to get you out of a stressful situation. What's actually happening there is that your nervous system is sending stress hormones into the bloodstream, and what those stress hormones are doing is priming the body for action. So it's sending extra blood and extra energy to the muscles, particularly in your limbs, to get you ready to go. It's speeding up your heart rate. It usually speeds up your breath as well. So it's getting you ready for action. This is obviously a great thing if you need to quickly get a whole lot of things done and to move quickly and make quick decisions. It's fine in the short term as well. It's not at all great if it goes on for a long time, or if there's a really big amount of it for a period of time. And so that's what we might call excess stress. That's when it gets a little bit overwhelming, when there's just too much of it. So either when there's too much in one short period of time, or when that low level stress goes on for a long period of time. That's also considered excess stress. So before I move on to the exercise that I want to show you to help you deal with stress when it's a bit overwhelming, when it's tipped over into that excess stress phase, I want you to spend just a couple of minutes talking amongst yourselves or suggesting perhaps to the whole group some of the ways that you already know, some of the things you already know help when you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by stress. So just take a couple of minutes, see if you can come up with one or two things amongst the group that you have, or if you're on your own, one or two things on your own that you already do that help you manage stress when it gets a little bit too much. Okay, hopefully you've realized that you do actually already have a number of things up your sleeve that you use to manage stress when it gets a little bit overwhelming, and that's really useful for you to remember that you actually already know how to deal with this in some ways. You might also have picked up some tips from other people who might have some really great ideas about how they manage excess stress. I've also left a few on the worksheet, or given you a few on the worksheet that other people have told me that they use quite successfully. So hopefully you'll feel like you've got a little bit of a toolbox here. What I want to do now is guide you through an exercise that is really useful when the stress really has just got to the point where you're like the guy in the picture. It's just really overwhelming and you just feel like putting your head on your desk or curling up in a ball and not dealing with anything. What I'm actually going to get you to do is in fact put your head on your desk right now. So I want you to move and there's nothing that you'll need to see on the screen while you're doing this, so you can just listen to me as I give you the instructions. I've also provided some pictures of this exercise so that you can look at that in your own time if you need to, or if later you need to be reminded of how to do this. What I want you to do is see if you can push the chair that you're sitting in far enough away from your desk so that you can lean your forehead on the desk. If that's not comfortable for you, or if, say, you're wearing glasses and they'll get in the way of you putting your forehead on your desk, you might like to instead put your elbows on the desk, and if you need to look, I'm demonstrating now, put your forehead on the heels of your hands. So either you'll have your arms sitting on the desk in front of you and your forehead resting like I'm showing now, or you might have your elbows resting on the desk and your forehead sitting on the heels of your hands. So just take a moment to figure out which of those things will be most comfortable for you. And then I want you to see if you can make that double chin that we talked about. And no one can see you now, so you can go for it. All you're doing there is just lengthening those muscles at the back of the neck that we've already talked about. And then from here, see if you can notice what it is that your breathing is doing. Now, you don't need to be breathing in any particular way at this point. I just want you to see if you can notice what's already happening with your breathing. So some of the things that you might notice are whether or not you're breathing through your nose or whether you're breathing through your mouth. You might notice if the breathing is short or long. You might notice if the breathing feels like it's happening easily, or if maybe it feels a little bit laboured or a little bit difficult. And again, there are no right or wrong answers to this. You're just noticing what's actually there. And then I want you to see if you can imagine that there is an invisible line running from the very base of your spine, so right down near your tailbone, so where your tail would come out if you had one. So running from the very base of the spine, a line all the way up the length of the spine to the back of the roof of your mouth. And then see if you can imagine that there's a little ball of light or colour or warmth, whichever of those things makes sense to you just in this moment. And as you inhale, that little ball of light or colour or warmth runs from the tailbone, the base of the spine, up along the length of the spine to the back of the roof of your mouth. And as you exhale, that little ball of light or colour or warmth runs from the back of the roof of your mouth all the way down to the tailbone. So inhaling, the little ball runs up the spine, and exhaling, it runs back down. Now, if you notice that you have become distracted, that's completely normal and totally fine. But if you notice that's happened, just start again. So just start again with the imagining of the ball of light or warmth or colour moving up the spine as you inhale and down the spine as you exhale. You might like to stay with this visualization. If that's working well for you, I'd suggest sticking with that. Or you might like to try a slightly different way of maintaining the focus on the breath, which is to count the breath silently. So as you inhale, you'll count silently to 4, and as you exhale, you'll count silently to 4. Inhale, counting to 4, and exhale, counting to 4. Remember, if you get distracted at any point, there's no need to be annoyed at yourself about that. That's just normal. It happens. Our brains do that. But when you notice that it's happened, just start again. Inhale, counting to 4, and exhale, counting to 4. Now, if the even breathing is quite comfortable for you, you might like to try encouraging the exhales to be a little longer than the inhales. So you'll inhale and count to 4, and exhale and count to 5 or maybe 6. Inhale to 4, exhale to 5 or maybe 6. Let's just have 2 or 3 more breaths here. And sitting up once you've had those breaths. So just briefly, there are a couple of different things that are going on there in that exercise. So remember how I talked about when you're stressed, the body goes into this sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response? What we're doing in this exercise is trying to encourage what's almost the opposite of that. So it's called the parasympathetic part of the nervous system, or the rest and digest part of the nervous system. So by putting your forehead either on the desk or on your arms or on the heels of your hands, you're putting a little bit of pressure on a nerve that runs through the forehead that is part of this parasympathetic nervous system. So just stimulating that a little bit encourages the body to relax already. The second part of the exercise there is that you're focusing on your breathing, and then you're beginning to even the breathing out, and then you're beginning to encourage the exhales to be a little bit longer. Now, breathing is one of the most powerful ways that we can change very quickly how we're feeling. Encouraging the breathing to slow down like that, and then encouraging the exhales to slow down, is, again, another way of tapping into that parasympathetic nervous system, the rest or digest part of the nervous system. It's a way of encouraging the body and the mind to just calm down slowly. Now, there's quite a complex thing going on there with how it is that your body is processing the different gases that are moving in and out of the lungs, and we don't have time to go into that today. But if you take nothing else away from this workshop, please try and remember that if you can just focus on slowing your exhales down, that will be a really, really useful tool for you in managing those really high stress moments that we all have in our lives from time to time. And practicing that exercise when you're not feeling super stressed out, so practicing it when you're already a little bit calm, is just a really good way of getting your body to be familiar with how that works, so that when you need to use that tool in a more high stress situation, it's already something that your body knows how to do and that your brain knows how to do. So again, I'm going to repeat. If you don't remember anything else from this workshop, see if you can try to remember that the exhales, slowing the exhales down, is a quick way of starting to calm your body down. It's a really, really useful tool. So what we've talked about today is a lot of different ways to notice stress from a number of different angles. And ultimately, what we're doing there is trying to prevent ourselves getting to the point of excess stress. So we're not trying to eliminate stress, we're just trying to prevent ourselves getting to the point where it's too much. So we've talked about the ways in which you might notice stress. You might notice it in your posture. So if you're doing the hunchy desk posture, you might sort of think, oh, okay, I'm feeling a little bit stressed there. You might notice it in your feelings. Like I said, that I feel grumpy or feel like I'm in a hurry. That's one of the ways I notice it. You might notice it in your breathing. If your breathing's a little bit labored or you're not exhaling properly, that might be a way of thinking, oh, okay, I'm a little bit stressed. So these are ways of beginning to notice stress as it's starting to build up or over time. And we've done a couple of exercises that can help you begin to deal with the stress at that point. It's, again, really important to practice those exercises when you're not feeling particularly stressed, so that when you need to use them as a tool when you are stressed, it's already familiar. You're not needing to learn something new because you've already done that learning. So just to recap, what we've talked about today is that stress is just a sense of pressure. It's just a sign that something needs to change, that you want to change something about your situation. It's not necessarily good or bad. We've learned some ways to soothe excess stress and to cope with feeling overwhelmed. We've learned that breathing is a very effective stress management tool. Remember to exhale and see if you can slow the exhales down. And we've learned to notice the ways in which you feel stress. If you are able to notice that you're feeling stressed, then you can actually do something about it. You can tend to it. You can look after yourself. And that is the best way of managing your stress over time, is being able to step in and look after yourself when you can see that you need it. So I hope that today has been, or this workshop has been, really useful for you. And please feel free to rewatch the exercise parts of the workshop or to use the worksheets that I have provided with this as well. And hopefully you'll be able to prevent yourself from getting to that excess stress mode too often in your life. Or if you do get there, you'll know how to deal with it when you do. So good luck with everything that's coming up for you, whether that's study or work or some combination of the two. And just because I think it's really important, I want to end by repeating the thing about breathing being one of the most powerful ways that we can change how we're feeling. So remember, if you're feeling like you're starting to get a bit stressed or you're already quite stressed, if you can remember to notice your breathing and to slow down your exhales, you're well on the way to starting to manage your stress a little better. Thank you.